America is experiencing the largest financial walk-off in modern history, and nobody in power wants to talk about it. Not the news, not the policymakers, not the CEOs. But the numbers don't lie. Over 12 million Americans left their jobs in 2025, not because they found something better, but because they couldn't survive on the wages they were already earning. 1 in 4 renters is planning to leave their home within the next 12 months because the next rent increase will bankrupt them. And here's the one that really should scare you. 51% of Americans no longer believe they will ever be financially stable again. Not eventually, not after the economy recovers, ever. So when you see people abandoning leases, ignoring bills, quitting jobs, living in hotels, breaking with the credit system, understand this isn't chaos. This is a national survival response. Because at this point, millions of Americans aren't struggling. They've already been priced out of the world they're supposed to live in. You know, the more I look around at what's happening across America right now, the harder it is to pretend we're living in anything close to a functioning economy, because when you talk to people, really talk to them, you realize the labor shortage everyone keeps arguing about isn't a shortage at all. It's a mass walk-off. Millions of Americans are stepping away from full-time employment, not because they suddenly got lazy or want to sit on a beach all day with a piña colada, but because the math is so broken that clocking in every morning is practically a financial self-harm act. And the wild part is that companies know it. A Bloomberg report from late 2025 showed that 42% of Americans earning under $38,000 a year spent more on transportation and childcare than they actually made from the job itself, meaning they were paying to work. Imagine that. You spend 8 hours on your feet, your boss treats you like a disposable coffee filter, and at the end of the month, you're negative. And then these same companies scream, "Nobody wants to work anymore." Oh, really? Because maybe nobody wants to lose $300 a month just to smile at rude customers and beg for one weekend off. And jobs that used to be reliable, teaching, nursing, retail management, have become rotating doors. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, voluntary quit rates in 2025 are 29% higher than before the pandemic. And here's the part nobody tells you. Wages rose, sure, but not enough to matter. When the cost of living rises 17% in a 2-year span and your employer rewards you with a 2.4% raise, that's not a raise. That's a prank. That's a slap wrapped in a paycheck. So people are walking away, not just from jobs, but careers they once dreamed about. And honestly, I don't blame them, because if your rent is $2,300 and your job pays $19 an hour, the job isn't a lifeline. It's a sinkhole. Americans aren't giving up. They're waking up. They're realizing the economy is basically a treadmill set to Olympic sprinter, and sooner or later, you just step off because your legs can't take it anymore. And when millions of people all reach that breaking point at the same time, well, that's not a worker problem. That's a system collapse. Something that absolutely nobody in Washington wants to talk about, but everyone in real life keeps whispering to each other, is the quiet wave of Americans packing up and leaving their homes before the eviction notice ever hits their door. Not because they're irresponsible or because they didn't budget correctly, but because the cost of staying is so absurdly out of reach that leaving is the only plan that still resembles hope. In 2025, the data is honestly terrifying. 29% of renters are now spending over half their income on rent, which economists classify as severely rent-burdened. But we're not talking about luxury condos overlooking the water. These are 40-year-old buildings with black mold behind the paint and plumbing, older than the moon landing. And here's a number the media practically buried. Nearly 3.8 million Americans left their rental units early in 2025 without securing a new lease, often moving into hotels, their cars, spare rooms, or nowhere at all. And when you ask them why, the answers are devastatingly consistent. My rent jumped $400 overnight. They added a $95 community maintenance fee for landscaping that doesn't exist. They said my credit score dropped 3 points and now my deposit doubled. Or my personal favorite, they raised the rent 22%, but the ceiling still leaks. And then landlords act shocked that people bail. Meanwhile, private equity firms have gobbled up nearly 20% of all single-family rentals in major metro areas. And once they do, Rents spike an average of 18% within the first year. So yeah, people are walking away. Because paying $2,150 for a one-bedroom with drywall softer than birthday cake doesn't make sense. Because choosing between staying housed and staying fed isn't a real choice. Because when you see your rent renewal notice and your heart rate jumps like you're being chased, that's not housing. That's captivity. And the worst part? A Harvard housing study found that 52% of renters leaving early in 2025 had no plan, no backup apartment, and no savings, meaning they stepped into uncertainty because certainty was worse. That is the United States of America right now. People aren't being evicted, they're pre-evicting themselves, and millions more are right behind them. Let's be honest with each other for a second, because I know you felt this in your chest. There comes a point where the numbers on your bills stop feeling real. Not because you're irresponsible, but because the math simply doesn't add up anymore, no matter how many side hustles, overtime shifts, or lattes lectures you take. And Americans across the country have hit that point simultaneously. In 2025, delinquency numbers tell the entire story. Credit card delinquencies are up 34% year over year. Auto loan delinquencies are at their highest level since 2009, and here's the shocking part. Utility non-payment is up 22%. The biggest jump in modern history. People aren't paying because they can't. And the average American family isn't out here buying yachts and diamond-plated dog collars. They're behind on electricity, water, and basic medical bills. The average household now carries $18,900 in credit card debt, which wouldn't be as terrifying if interest rates weren't averaging 24.6%, the highest in U.S. history. You could pay $250 a month and never actually see the number drop. And when you combine that with housing, groceries, gas, and increasingly predatory insurance premiums, the breaking point becomes obvious. But here's something you probably didn't know. A new consumer survey found that 41% of Americans who stopped paying bills this year did so intentionally, not because they didn't have the money, but because they prioritized survival over keeping a perfect credit score. People are ranking bills by which ones will ruin their lives the least. Do I want to lose my car? No. Do I want the lights shut off? Definitely not. Can I survive a few nasty letters from Visa? Yeah, actually. And this is happening at a scale economists weren't prepared for. Households that once had spotless payment histories are now months behind. People with 760 credit scores are sliding into the 500s. And the absurdity is that the financial system keeps blaming consumers instead of admitting the truth. The cost of living has officially detached from reality. When a gallon of milk costs more than your childhood lunch combo, when car insurance jumps 40% in a single year, when every bill increases while your paycheck doesn't, you don't fall behind. You get pushed. And millions of Americans have reached that point where paying their bills hurts more than skipping them. That is the real delinquency crisis of 2025. Americans aren't just walking away, they're tapping out. Here's the part almost nobody is talking about, but everyone feels deep down. Americans aren't just walking away from jobs, homes, and bills. They're walking away from the entire emotional weight of a system that has pushed them to their absolute limit. And I don't say that lightly, because when you look at the data, the truth hits harder than any headline. A recent Gallup poll revealed that 76% of Americans describe themselves as financially overwhelmed, which is the highest level ever recorded. And it's not just the broke, the unemployed, or the young. It's professionals with degrees, parents working full-time, people who did everything right and still ended up drowning. Mental health surveys in 2025 show something even more shocking. 1 in 3 Americans say they feel they are one major bill away from losing their stability, and 27% admit they have considered leaving their city, their job, or even the country entirely just to escape the pressure. That's not normal. That's not sustainable. And yet it's happening every single day. Therapists across the nation are reporting unprecedented spikes in burnout, with an 89% increase in clients specifically citing financial anxiety and housing insecurity as their main source of distress. Think about that. Almost double. And therapists say people aren't coming in asking how to manage stress or build resilience. They're asking how to survive. They're asking how to cope with the guilt of moving back home at 33. They're asking how to explain to their kids why groceries feel like luxury items. They're asking why they worked 20 years only to feel more unstable now than they did at 20. And here's the emotional shift nobody is prepared for. Americans are starting to detach from the system entirely. They're stopping rent negotiations because what's the point? They're ignoring bills because there's nothing left to take. They're quitting jobs without a backup plan because I'm exhausted in a way sleep can't fix. This isn't laziness. It's national burnout. It's a collective emotional strike. And once millions of people hit that silent breaking point, you don't just have an economic crisis, you have a social one. And that's where America is standing right now, whether policymakers want to admit it or not. We are a nation of people pushed past the threshold, and the walk-offs you're seeing aren't impulsive. They're the last option people have left. What nobody wants to admit out loud. But everyone who works in retail, healthcare, restaurants, warehouses, and gig jobs already knows is that America has quietly created an entire new class of people, the half-homeless worker. These are Americans who still show up to work every morning, wearing clean clothes, handling customers, scanning groceries, filing reports, delivering packages. But when their shift ends, they have no stable place to sleep. And this is not some fringe crisis affecting a tiny percentage of people. No, this has exploded into mainstream normalcy. A 2025 housing study found that nearly 18% of full-time workers under age 40 have lived in their car, a hotel, a friend's couch, or a rotating series of temporary spaces in the last 24 months. Think about that. Almost 1 in 5 workers who clock in for 8 hours every day, pay taxes, and keep this economy running cannot secure a permanent address. And here's the part that's even more disturbing. Corporate America knows this. They've built HR systems that require pay stubs but don't actually care where you sleep, because the worker shortage is so severe that companies have silently accepted the new reality. Your employees may be homeless, but as long as they show up, nobody asks questions. And here's where the numbers get jaw-dropping. Hotel occupancy rates among long-term stay guests, 30 days or more, have risen 42% since 2021. And the majority of those guests are not tourists, retirees, or business travelers. They're low to mid-income workers who can no longer qualify for an apartment. Meanwhile, vehicle registration data shows a 23% surge in people using minivans, SUVs, and even old work trucks as primary residence addresses, which is another way of saying people are living in their cars. And no, these are not lazy, irresponsible people. These are dental hygienists, receptionists, warehouse associates, Starbucks baristas, pharmacy techs, call center workers. The people keeping daily life functioning. They are sleeping in 24-hour parking lots and Planet Fitness parking spaces because rent applications now require 3 times the income, a spotless credit score, a security deposit equal to a month's rent, a background check, and often an extra $300 in administrative fees just to apply. America used to say, if you work full-time, you will have a roof over your head. But now, you can work 40, 50, even 60 hours a week and still live one flat tire away from collapse, and millions already have. Now let's talk about something that should terrify anyone who grew up believing in the American dream, even the people with the so-called good jobs, the teachers, the nurses, the engineers, the civil servants, the IT specialists, are starting to walk away from their entire financial structure because that structure has turned into a trap. And I'm not exaggerating here. A 2025 workforce analysis found that middle-income households earning between $70,000 and $120,000 now have the highest rate of financial insolvency growth in the country, increasing 31% year over year. These are not reckless spenders. These are people who played by every rule society told them to. They got degrees. They built careers. They got married. They bought houses. They invested in their retirement. And then they woke up one day and realized the whole thing costs more than it returns. Take homeownership. Property taxes are up 19% nationally in just 3 years. Home insurance is up 34%. Repairs have increased 26%. And mortgage rates pushed the average monthly payment on a median home up $978 more per month compared to pre-2020 levels. Meanwhile, wages for mid-career workers have risen only 4.1% since 2021. That's not a gap, it's a financial canyon. And because of that canyon, something absolutely unprecedented is happening. Middle-class Americans are voluntarily surrendering their homes to banks, not foreclosing out of desperation, but walking away because the math simply doesn't work anymore. Mortgage brokers call it strategic abandonment, and cases are up 63% in 2025 alone. Teachers leaving $420,000 suburban homes. Engineers giving up houses they renovated. Nurses who no longer want to sink money into a structure that costs more than it builds. And the same thing is happening with student loans, with auto loans, with insurance policies. People aren't defaulting because they're irresponsible. They're defaulting because the financial architecture of the United States has become so top-heavy, so predatory, and so unrealistic that the middle class cannot sustain it anymore. And here's the most chilling statistic of all. 52% of Americans earning over $100,000 now say they are living paycheck to paycheck. That is not a middle class. That is a mass delusion held together by credit scores and denial. And people are finally saying, enough. Now we arrive at one of the most shocking shifts happening across America right now, something economists swore would never, ever happen at scale. And that is the deliberate choice millions of Americans are making to stop caring about their credit scores. For decades, the credit system was the ultimate leash. You didn't miss a payment because you were terrified of the consequences. Bad credit meant no car, no apartment, no loan, no anything. But in 2025, for the first time in modern U.S. history, credit apathy has become a mainstream survival strategy. People are no longer scared of bad credit because everything is unaffordable even when you have good credit. Why try to protect a financial score that doesn't protect you? And the numbers prove this mindset is exploding like wildfire. Experian reports that 31% of Americans under age 45 have intentionally stopped paying at least one major bill in the past 12 months, knowing it would damage their credit. That is millions of people saying, I don't care anymore. And the average credit score in the U.S. fell for the second consecutive year, a drop of 14 points overall, but a jaw-dropping 37 points for those under 35. And guess what? These same people are discovering that society can't function without them. Landlords still need tenants, employers still need workers, banks still need customers. In fact, landlords in several major cities have quietly relaxed their credit requirements because the rental market is collapsing under its own weight. Meanwhile, Americans have figured out something the financial industry hoped they'd never realize. Debt collectors have almost no real power beyond annoying phone calls. They can't arrest you. They can't repossess things you don't own. And with millions of accounts going delinquent at the same time, lenders can't afford to pursue everyone. So people are making a rational choice. Keep the lights on, keep the car running, feed the kids, and let the rest burn. And the cultural shift is seismic. Social media is full of people proudly announcing they quit the credit system. Group chats full of friends sharing which bills they stopped paying first. People trading tips on which lenders negotiate and which fold under pressure. It's a financial rebellion, and it's happening because the system stopped serving the people a long time ago. Americans aren't destroying their credit. They're refusing to let credit destroy them. What's happening right now across the country, and I mean quietly, privately, in break rooms, in group chats, in late-night conversations between exhausted couples, is that millions of Americans no longer believe the economy they hear about on TV has anything to do with the economy they're actually living in. Because when the government calls 2025 a soft landing, people look around and see their friends breaking leases, defaulting on loans, working 60 hours a week just to stay in the same place, and they think, what landing? We're still falling. And the data paints a picture that should make every economist in Washington lose sleep. 81% of Americans say the economy feels worse than the official numbers claim, and consumer sentiment remains at dangerously low levels despite stock indexes breaking records. Why? Because people don't live in the Dow Jones. They live in states where groceries are up 19% since 2022, insurance costs are up 36%, rent is up 27%, and wages barely budged. And here's something absolutely wild. In 2025, the Federal Reserve reported that over half of Americans experienced a net monthly negative, meaning more money left their household every month than entered it. In other words, people aren't budgeting, they're bleeding. And when you live in a financial system where you fall further behind, even when you do everything right, you eventually stop believing the system is real at all. That's why you're seeing millions of Americans walking away from jobs that don't pay enough to survive, homes that cost more than they're worth, bills that multiply like bacteria, and lifestyles that no longer make mathematical sense. People are done pretending everything is fine. A massive survey found that 62% of Americans now believe they will never achieve financial stability. Not because they're lazy, not because they aren't working, but because the economy has become so warped, so inflated, and so detached from human reality that the average person simply cannot keep up. And here's the psychological shift everyone is missing. Once people stop believing the system is fair, they stop participating in it. That's why millions are ditching credit scores, abandoning mortgages, rejecting rent hikes, and taking jobs far below their qualifications just for a chance at a life that doesn't feel like drowning. It's not apathy. It's not laziness. It's disillusionment. When the numbers stop adding up, people stop playing the game, and America has reached that point. We need to be brutally honest here, because millions of Americans are thinking this quietly. But almost nobody wants to say it openly. The social contract that held this country together. The idea that if you work hard, play by the rules, contribute to society, and sacrifice today, you'll be rewarded tomorrow, is officially broken. And people know it. People feel it deep in their bones. Because how can anyone believe in upward mobility when 63% of Americans who grew up middle class are now falling below the income tier their parents lived in? How can people believe in hard work when the average worker produces 74% more value for their employer than they did in 1980, but wages have barely moved? How can people believe in just save more when median savings accounts have dropped to $147, the lowest level in a decade, while the average emergency expense is now $2,800? You cannot save what does not exist. Every part of the American system, from housing to healthcare to higher education to transportation to retirement, costs multiples more than it did for previous generations, while paychecks grow like snails. And here's something even more devastating. 39% of millennials and 46% of Gen Z say they have stopped planning for retirement entirely because they don't believe retirement will exist for them at all. The trust is gone. The faith is gone. The belief that the system is designed for the average American is gone. And once that belief collapses, everything else follows. People stop chasing promotions because the raise won't touch their rent. They stop paying student loans because the balance never drops anyway. They stop dreaming about homes because the average starter house now costs 8.2 times the typical income, the worst ratio since economic records began. And they stop trying to do better because better has become a moving target nobody can reach. America's social contract was built on stability, opportunity, and fairness. But when millions of people work full-time and still can't afford groceries, rent, or basic medical care, that contract isn't just fraying, it's ashes. And when a nation realizes the deal is broken, you don't get reform. You get withdrawal. Americans aren't walking away from responsibilities. They're walking away from a system that walked away from them first. Here's the truth. Nobody in Washington, Wall Street, or the media wants to admit, but every single American can feel rising inside themselves like pressure under a cracked foundation. We are living through a national breaking point. Not a recession, not a market correction. A breaking of the American spirit under the weight of a system that demands everything and gives almost nothing back. Because by the end of 2025, millions of Americans aren't just walking away from jobs, homes, and bills. They're walking away from the idea that this country is still built for ordinary people. And the data proves it. 58% of Americans say the system is rigged against them, the highest level ever recorded. 72% believe their children will be financially worse off than they are. And the most shocking number of all? 1 in 3 Americans says that if they lost their income today, they would not make it past 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That is not a functioning society. That is a nation surviving on borrowed time. You've got families making $90,000 a year, once considered a solid middle-class income, now skipping dental care, postponing medical tests, cutting groceries, and delaying every purchase not nailed to the floor. You've got seniors working at Walmart and Amazon warehouses because their Social Security check covers exactly 12 days of living expenses. You've got entire cities where the median rent is higher than the median full-time paycheck. And so, yeah, people are tapping out. Not because they want to, not because they're lazy, but because the system has become so wildly unsustainable that participating in it feels like drowning. That's why Americans are letting their credit scores crash. That's why they're surrendering mortgages. That's why they're walking out of jobs that grind them down but don't pay enough to survive. That's why millions are stepping out of the official economy and building new lives in cash work, gig swaps, bartering networks, extended family households, RV living, car camping, hotel hopping, and underground economies that were once unthinkable. When people feel betrayed by the system, they build their own. And that is exactly what's happening right now. This isn't rebellion. This isn't laziness. This is survival. The United States has reached a moment where being responsible, being loyal, being hardworking no longer guarantees stability. And millions of Americans are finally saying out loud what they've whispered for years. If the system won't protect me, why should I stay loyal to it? That is the breaking point, and America has crossed it. So listen, after everything we just went through, after all the numbers, the stories, the warnings, you have to understand something. None of this is normal, and none of this is your fault. You are living in an economy that demands superhuman strength just to achieve basic survival. And if you're tired, if you're drained, if you're asking yourself how you're supposed to keep going while prices rise faster than your paycheck ever could, you're not alone. In fact, you're part of the majority now. Because as of 2025, 63% of Americans say they feel like the system is actively working against them, and nearly 70% say their quality of life has declined in the last 5 years. That's not anecdotal. That's a national crisis. A crisis created by rising rents, collapsing wages, corporate greed, and a government that seems more interested in telling you everything is fine than actually fixing anything. But here's what matters most. You are not crazy for feeling overwhelmed. You are not lazy, you are not failing, and you are not bad with money. You're living in a country where one broken transmission, one rent hike, one medical bill can end everything. And millions of people, hardworking, responsible people, are already walking away from a system that stopped supporting them a long time ago. So if you're watching this and thinking, something has to change, you're absolutely right. Because the truth is, America cannot keep going like this. Not for another year. Not for another month. People are stretched to the breaking point, and once enough people break, the entire structure starts to crack. Let me know how things look where you are. Let me know if you're seeing the same walk-offs, the same despair, the same impossible math. Your comments matter, your stories matter, and honestly, they help more people than you realize. Take care of yourself. Seriously. And I hope to catch you in the next one, because by this time next year, the numbers might look very different, and not in the way any of us are hoping for.